Welcome to the Tech Trek, where technology leaders share their insights, experiences, and views. Every week I bring you a new guest. And on today's episode...
My name is Suresh Teckchandani. I'm the VP of Product and Engineering at Ancestry. I oversee e-commerce, MarTech stack, and some of the backend data infrastructure and other pieces such as growth, onboarding, and such for the company.
Thanks for being on the podcast, Suresh. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Amir, for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I know we're going to be talking about quality, velocity, delivering value at scale, and talking about, the business need to act fast and balancing that with making sure quality is at the highest level. Obviously, your background, everyone will be able to kind of go on LinkedIn and take a look at it. You've worked for some big companies, large platforms. When you kind of, maybe at the highest level, just to kind of kick it off, when you look at this question of quality and velocity from, larger scale platforms, there's some unique challenges because obviously as your brand grows and expectations grow, quality starts becoming, very assumptive versus, if you're a startup and you have that beta label, you have some flexibility. But once you're like, an Intuit or a PayPal or, Ancestry, people have expectations, correct?
Yep, that's right.
And I guess when you're looking at that question of balancing velocity and quality, and you're looking at your delivery and making sure you're delivering value at scale, I mean, what are some of the factors to ensure that that quality piece doesn't suffer, at the hands of, trying to increase speed?
Yeah, sure. So my thoughts there is that, the operating model that you put in place as the technology leader responsible for a significant area in your technology ecosystem at your company, which is, probably large scale or a high growth kind of company. The operating model is to have the right infrastructure in place to be able to deliver value at scale. This means investing in your key pieces of your infrastructure, such as data lake, customer data platform, experimentation infrastructure, which we are seeing more and more traction in, processes around your data quality, privacy, governance, AI ML, which has picked up quite a bit of interest in the recent weeks and months, and so on and so forth. So it's important to have all those elements in place so that you can take advantage of some of these capabilities to deliver value at scale for your customers.
Awesome. And I guess we want to maybe balance that conversation with business, right? So as the business initiatives and the dynamic capability of a business needs to be in place, they need to react, they need to move and pivot. Technology quite, doesn't necessarily isn't able to move as fast, right? Like they might have a little bit of a lag. And obviously, we come into the question of tech debt and when do you incur that to ensure, maybe you can move to fill a need or whatnot. But when you're looking at, talking to business, understanding business and making sure that, you're again looking back at the quality, velocity, balance and being able to move and pivot quickly for the sake of business sometimes, how do you balance that? And how do you communicate to business to make sure they are aware that their decisions are going to take time?
Well, I think what works best in those kinds of scenarios that you kind of laid out, Amir, is you got to make sure that your ideas that you entertain or you discuss, those are experimented first, right? So having the ability to test or iterate over some of these ideas and truly be data driven, right? We all have ideas, we all have our thoughts and experiences that we've had, after being in the industry for so long. But some of those ideas don't pan out, right? So the question becomes, how deep do you want to go in implementing those ideas or getting those out to production before you have really proven them out, right? So it's important for any organization in today's day and age to set up the processes and technologies that enable them to iterate over those ideas fast and learn from them as you go along to see which are these ideas that will amount to a win for the business and the customers, right? And once you know what those are, that's when you back them up with your capital investment, right? And that's when you kind of bring it to the core, if you will, right? So that's how I think about, exploring new ideas, getting those ideas out to the market, taking advantage of some of the advancements that have taken place in the experimentation space. We have just so many companies now providing that experimentation infrastructure that you can leverage to test your ideas out, quick and dirty before you go all in.
I think that's actually a great way to view it, especially, if you have the ability to test early and be ready and have some of the data points. I guess when you're looking at the case where sometimes you might run into a case where the business is, trying to roll something out and the time to deliver will be a little bit longer. There is some pushback and obviously there's a balance there. The notion of tech debt sometimes comes into play because you assume, all right, well, we'll get it done, quote unquote, quick and dirty, but that has problems and consequences too. Is the balance of that in how you communicate to business that quick and dirty doesn't always play out well? Is there a way that conversation happens? And obviously there's different stakeholders that have different levels of understanding of the impact of that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Amir, that you're asking. So once you've kind of locked down the idea that you want to push forward, the conversations need to happen around what is the MVP, right? What is the minimal viable product that you want to roll out as part of your first release of that feature set or that product? And not everything is going to be P1, right? We know that, right? So kind of having those very specific conversations about what is the MVP for this product launch, right? Having a deeper dive with the engineering teams, with the architects and so on to understand the scope of the work, right? And making sure that we are approaching the project in the right sequence. You don't want to build a massive piece of infrastructure to enable a product feature that needs to go out in a couple of months, right? That would not make sense because you would miss the business opportunity by the time you're there. Or if you decide to do it, the business might not, back your ideas up, right? In that case. So regardless, it's important for you to have that clear communication with your stakeholders, understand what is MVP, have a clear path as to how you're going to go to production with some of those key features, and then making sure that we're making choices along the way that would not amount to significant tech debt down the road, right? And if you make those choices, then make sure there is a plan in place to pay off that debt shortly after the project has gone live. That's something that I've done several times where there has been business pressure to get something out the door faster. And we made conscious choice of incurring some tech debt that we said to ourselves that we're going to pay off right after the feature launch. And we did.
Absolutely. I guess, as you're mentioning that, the next question maybe that pops into my mind is, this notion of tech debt. We have this conversation of quality, velocity. I guess a part of this, as you kind of talked about MVP, you talked about, you go back and fix it. Some of it is engineering culture. Some of it is, understanding, company standards, manager to manager. When you're managing your teams, and obviously I know at your level, you manage different teams, different managers, and you're kind of observing this quality velocity across different teams. Are you also aware of, each team has different, I don't want to call significances, but they have different product roadmaps. They have different features. Do you adjust your view of quality and velocity across different teams?
I would say the short answer is no. Yeah, we live by a common set of values across my organization, something that I talk about every quarter in my all hands. So it's no secret to anybody that engineering excellence and paying attention to the quality, the performance, and the functional capabilities that we're rolling out to customers has to be top notch, right? Something that we take a lot of pride in, and we frankly gauge ourselves against those set of metrics that we try to hit quarter after quarter. So the question becomes, how does each team adhere to those common set of expectations when it comes to quality of your software that you're building, right? And to be honest with you, the mechanics changes depending on the team, right? How they achieve those goals and how they make decisions and so on and so forth. But we absolutely are committed to providing, very high quality products to our customers and help the business any which way we can to win.
And that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I think, consistency across the teams is super valuable. When you mentioned, I guess, you're all hands and you're communicating your values, and obviously your manager's job is to implement some of those, do you look at the implementation of what you've communicated as something managers customize per team? You mentioned standards. Is it more about the spirit or letter of the law when you're looking at how the teams actually carry out their day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, each team, because I run a very diverse organization, I have people, for example, building functionality on Salesforce platform, for example. I've got teams building, data infrastructure, on AWS. I've got teams building, front-end experiences, right? In some cases, we have team building, integrations with some of our partners, external partners. And we have some teams building like internal platforms, right? E-commerce and such. So I have a pretty diverse organization. So when you say quality, when you talk about performance, the definition of implementation, how they go about achieving those KPIs, right, that we care about varies, right, depending on the team at hand. For example, the front end is going to have very different set of metrics to, or mechanics, right, to deliver against versus some of the infrastructural teams, right? They worry more about the scale and be able to deliver experiences, or service the customers, with greater efficiencies, with the higher throughput, right, lower error rates, and be cost effective, right, and not exceed our cost budget, right, cost expectations that we have. So I think some of that changes, and that depends on the team, and we review that on a monthly basis, see how we are performing against all of our KPIs across the spectrum, and if there are areas that need more attention and course corrections have to be made, then we make those calls.
I guess as you're kind of looking at, we talked about some of the MVP component. You talked about obviously different teams will have their own obviously processes they're following, different constructs. When you kind of dotted line back this to what you mentioned, responding to the business fast and obviously understanding some of the constraints of tech debt and kind of the value that you want to deliver. When you're building roadmaps and you're talking to the business, how much, I guess, are you providing back in terms of some of the not the consequences, but some of how the decisions impact the larger picture? How much of that gets communicated back to the the business stakeholders?
Yeah, so we are a very transparent organization, and my personal style actually also lends to that pretty well. All the companies that I've worked at, I've had very strong relationships, right, with my business stakeholders, people working in the finance organization, and so on and so forth. So we have basically operating rhythm, right, that we follow. We meet on a monthly basis where we share the key performance indicators that we have observed in the month before, and we discuss how things are working out or not in some cases, in which case we make those decisions to adjust our path forward. So I try to promote a culture where we are openly talking about the KPIs, what's working, what's not working, how we are performing against some of the company metrics, right, that we have set for ourselves for the current quarter or for the year, and making sure that we are working as one team, right? It's a team sport. We all will win together or we don't.
Yeah, 100%. No, I like that viewpoint. I mean, I think that's, transparency it's what you desire. Obviously, some places you get it a little bit less, you get it a little more, but I think it's easier to operate with that. I guess with that in mind, and you're talking about you mentioned your all hands meeting, and we talked about, how your managers and, have autonomy over their own teams. When you actually sit down and talk to your managers and, you're paying attention to what they need from you and obviously to achieve their goals and to be successful in delivering at the right velocity clip, what kind of conversations do you have in your one-on-ones with them? Because obviously you're paying attention to their needs to remove their impediments and block and tackle for them.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, the way I view my job is essentially twofold, right? One is to provide clear sense of direction to the team as to what the North Star matrix is, right? What our North Star is, what is it that we're here to do? What is our purpose? What is our strategy from business and technology perspective? And everybody understands and appreciates that. Right? So that's one. The second one is helping the team achieve some of those goals, right? Help them with implementing that strategy that we've already declared, and it is captured in the form of roadmap that you mentioned earlier, right? So that's when things get into the execution. So that's where you have a lot of tackling and just, that's where the hard part is, right? To getting things done, working with other teams that do not necessarily report up to me, having influence across the organization, making sure that the priorities that we are working off of are shared across the company, across other teams as well. Otherwise, you're going to be gridlocked, right? As you would imagine. So ensuring that there is a clear path of execution, we are removing roadblocks. In some cases, we have third-party vendors, right, that we are relying upon, and they are not delivering to the expectations. So having those hard conversations with some of those vendors to get the teams unblocked as part of my job as well. So just helping the teams, right? That's how I would recap, right? The way I sort of work with my teams.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned delivering value at scale, and obviously you mentioned you work for some fairly large companies, large platforms. When you're looking at that definition of value, and obviously I know you're aligning with business, as you mentioned, you meet monthly, share the KPIs. How often do you try to reevaluate what that value means?
So there are different tiers to it, right? One is the value that company is delivering, right, for the customers and the business, right? So you have some business or financial metrics that you're tracking. Maybe you're tracking monthly unique visitors to your site, right? If you're an e-commerce player, right? You have campaigns going out and you try to gauge efficiency of those, right? So those are like different set of metrics and different set of values that you would measure at the top level versus the things actually that are done at the engineering level, right? Those actually do map to those, larger output metrics, but we have sort of input metrics also, right, that you work off of, right? Making sure that you're hitting those, right? So depending on your business, right, you would have your internal input metrics, and which we track on a monthly basis, Amir. So we have monthly cadence that I mentioned earlier on the podcast, right? So I talked about, each team, depending on their functional area, they have their own set of input metrics that we track and try to move and make sure that those are, very well aligned with the output metrics or the value that company is trying to deliver for the business and the customers.
If you were to look back now and kind of look at, your last several jobs and kind of review and think about some of the lessons learned when you are looking at this question of quality velocity, are there any areas that you go are things you should keep in mind, ensure that you're not obviously swaying too far off into the tech debt area and trying to balance?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I've dealt with that many times in my career at different companies. And what I've learned over the years is the good companies, the companies that are, well situated and, well established to continue to gain from the business growth and they try to enable the business, right, and help the customers are the ones that are constantly re-architecting the system, right? They're constantly paying off the tech debt, trying not to incur new ones, right, as they go along. And you'll always have tech debt. I mean, there is no organization that doesn't have one. But the idea is to pay it off along the way or make sound technology decisions, right? Versus a very static kind of technology ecosystem. And I've worked at those companies too, by the way. And the day comes when your system no longer scales, right? You're unable to release a new feature. Why? Because your system just needs so much re-architecture, that you cannot keep up with your business needs, right? So you try to avoid that situation as much as possible by just being conscious of your technology platform, making sure that you're not incurring tech debt that is at a much higher rate, right? At a greater rate than you can pay off, right? And debt of any kind is bad, right? Be it financial or technology. If you incur it, make sure that you're paying off, right, along the way.
Absolutely. So obviously, across, the various organizations that you've been a part of, when you have seen things operating very well, fluidly responding to business, high quality, high velocity, what are some of the common, themes of those successful teams that we're delivering?
Yeah, so I would say the teams that share the common set of values, there are shared values in the company. There is more open dialogue and communication coming down from senior leaders who are more aligned with each other. And there is consistency in terms of what success means, what are the specific metrics that define their success, right? And it's essentially breaking it down for the teams. And the teams actually have a clear direction, right? As to, where to go, right? So if you provide that level of clarity and have this common set of values and principles that teams kind of live by, you see great outcomes, as opposed to those organizations where that is not the case.
I know you're a busy guy, so I know you've been on sharing with us and giving your feedbacks. I'd like to keep asking you questions and follow-ups, but I know you got to get back to your day job, so I appreciate you being on and sharing. Before I let you go, I like to ask every guest this question. If you could have the next guest cover a topic for the show, what would you like that topic to be?
I think the conversation that we are having was great, so we can probably continue this or even get into some of the more advanced topics, like, where we can talk about some of the technology trends these days and where the technology, is headed. I think some of those ideas would be great to discuss as well.
And if somebody wants to get a hold of you, what is a good way of contacting you?
The best way would be to hit me up on LinkedIn and do mention that you heard me on this podcast so I can, relate to this conversation and help you any which way I can.
Awesome. Thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. Really thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Amir. Thanks for inviting me.
That's it for this episode. I'll be back again with a different guest, a different topic. Until then, please like, subscribe, share, leave a comment wherever you are watching or listening to this episode. I can't thank you enough if you do. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.